Tingella's outward appearance, that of some living ball of vines, was all that could be seen by outside observers. No way. Misty murmured in awe. That's what Tangella really looks like. And I thought Dugtrio's full body was weird looking. Giselle shivered slightly while Soledad and Brock just looked on with mouths agape and eyes wide in shock. Ew, that's so nasty looking. It looks like some kind of creepy stick figure. Ash, Pikachu and Roselia all had similar expressions of disbelief on their faces as one of the great Poke mysteries was revealed right before their eyes, but for Erica and her employees, apparently seeing Tangella's true form wasn't a new occurrence. As matter of fact, the only thing that seemed to faze Erica was that her Pokémon had undoubtedly been beaten and was now laying unconscious in the middle of a small crater in the ground. Running out to Tangella and dropping down on her knees, Erica actually picked it up and held it close, eliciting comical shivers of disgust from Ash's friends, as she spoke in a despairing tone to her Pokémon. "Oh Tangella, I'm sorry about this." She hugged the beaten grass type even closer. "I should have known better than to have you use that technique. I just got so caught up in the battle that I wasn't thinking about what would happen if you got defeated and your vines weakened." Well, there was the explanation as to why she didn't freak out at the sight of Tangella's true form. The actual gym battle itself forgotten for the moment in the wake of such a baffling revelation, Ash pointed at the gym leader and her Pokémon with a dumbfounded, fish-like expression on his face. So Erica, you've actually seen this before. Isn't that bad?" The blue-haired young woman nodded slowly. "Yes, I trained Tangella to do this. It was a little surprising the first time I saw it too, but I learned it isn't dangerous for Tangella to regress to this state. It just happens when their vines get too weak to hold up their form and then it drops the shape they instinctively take from birth." Apparently, the other ladies who worked for Erica was nonplussed by the sight as well, since Delilah, not breaking character as the referee for the match, held her out and declared Ash and Roselia the victor. Even after Erica finally returned her beaten Pokémon and then quickly recomposed herself as a gym leader for the last round of the battle, Ash was still standing there with a slack-jawed expression. A sweat drop even forming on the back of his head as he thought to himself, "Man. I doubt even someone as seasoned as Professor Oak could see something like that and not get the willies." Eventually, he too managed to shake himself from his stupor, albeit barely, and then focused on Roselia to shift his mind back onto the task at hand. "Roselia, why don't you come back and rest for the last battle? You're in no shape to fight again and will probably get beat by whatever strong Pokémon I'm sure she'll bring out if you battle in this state. Not to mention you're poisoned, that's not a good combo." Looking back at her trainer and seeing the wisdom in his words, Roselia merely nodded tiredly like she was on her last legs anyway and allowed Ash to return her without a fuss. Pulling out her last Pokeball and then holding it up to her closed eyes, Erica murmured a few inaudible words to it before holding the ball out and saying with seriousness on her face, "I need your assistance in this battle, my dear old friend, come out Gloom." In a bright burst of sparkles, the evolved form of Oddish appeared on the battered concrete walkway, her face just as impassive and dull as Ash remembered from the first time he met her. Pulling out his own final Pokeball, Ash flipped it in his hand before tossing it into the air and yelling, "Bulbasaur, let's go." As the boy's second ever captured grass type appeared with a grunt of his name and with his eyes narrowed into a fiercely determined expression for the battle he had been called on to partake in, both Bulbasaur and Gloom's gazes seemed to lock almost instantly. And when they did, it was almost as though an instant rivalry to prove who was better settled itself upon the two of them. Noticing and all but being able to feel the intense seriousness their two powerful Pokémon were now emitting in preparation for the battle about to be had, due entirely to the bond they shared with them, Ash and Erica locked eyes as well. Their wills pitted against one another just like their Pokémon's own in the final battle to decide who was truly the better trainer. As soon as Delilah lowered her arms and gave the command for the battle to begin, it was obvious neither Ash nor Erica would be left behind in the other's dust. Not this time. Gloom, Bulbasaur. They shouted with one mind. Use tackle. Not just their trainers seemed to be on opposite sides of a synchronization of sorts. As soon as they heard the command, both Gloom and Bulbasaur took off at one another, showing impressive speed with their heads lowered to deliver the payload they had been commanded to. Meeting in the center of the makeshift battlefield, the two grass types' heads collided together in a show of force, and for the next several moments, the two of them simply pushed back and forth against one another in an attempt to gain superiority. Mouths set into tightly pursed lines of grit, eyes narrowed in grunts of exertion coming from the both of them, Bulbasaur and Gloom continued their game of wills before abruptly separating and jumping back just as both of their trainers, yet again, shouted the same command. Use Razor Leaf. From both grass Pokémon came two equally sizable and powerful-looking gusts of dagger-like leaves, each one launching said attacks at the near exact same time. However, like with Tackle earlier, both Pokémon were too skilled to simply stand in place like statues and eat the opposing side's attack. Drawing forth his strong, dexterous vines, which he used like clubs to rapidly knock the leaves coming his way out of their original trajectory, Bulbasaur quickly began making fast work of Gloom's attack. In similar terms, Erika's Pokémon evaded Bulbasaur's own attack in a different, but just as effective manner. Simply summoning forth another burst of sharp leaves from in between the ones atop her head, Gloom accurately managed to collide her wave of defensive greenery with her opponent's offensive variety. Dozens of leaves shooting through the air and sticking into the ground, into trees, and even slicing one another apart as both bouts of Razor Leaf collided, fought for dominance and cancelled each other out swiftly. Gloom used Sleep Powder. Erika commanded. Leaning forward, the odorous grass type started to release a cloud of orange spores from the top of its head bud, which drifted quickly towards Bulbasaur like an ethereal wave of beautiful, but toxic sleep-inducing poison. Not about to let his Pokémon get captured by such a simple but also highly dangerous tactic, Ash yelled out with urgency in his voice. Bulbasaur, use your vines to make a whirlwind. Nodding determinedly, one of the three famous Kanto starter Pokémon drew out his vines and spun them rapidly, making a gust of wind which went up and met the orange cloud of spores head-on. Within seconds, the wind won out and blew apart Gloom's attack, but that was when the truth behind the seemingly simplistic strategy of Erika's sharp ingenuity was revealed. Before he could hardly even adjust his eyes to what was coming his way, Bulbasaur suddenly lunged back as a flying glob of thick purple gloop struck him right in the face. Falling onto his hindquarters and shaking his head madly back and forth, Ash's Pokémon found himself to be in a slight state of panic, since the strange substance now attached to his face like a wet plaster simply refused to come off. Smirking, Erika brought a hand up and gave voice to what just happened. Acid is a pretty useful move to use if you want to throw your opponents off their game, wouldn't you say so, Ash? Maybe you should have been watching Gloom a little more instead of just that sleep powder, and this wouldn't have happened. As Ash gritted his teeth in frustration, Erika suddenly gave another command to her Pokémon. Gloom, use Growth and Mega Drain. Gloom. The bipedal grass type voiced as she planted her feet to the ground and then looked up towards the sun above. At the same time, a bright golden glow started to surround her body as Gloom appeared to almost be in some kind of a euphoria. Seconds later, that golden glow turned into the familiar light green aura of Mega Drain. Only this one in particular seemed to be about 5 times more enhanced and powerful due to the energy-boosting move Erika's Pokémon had just used previously. Ah crap! Ash yelled. Bulbasaur, get that stuff off your face and move. Bringing one of his vines up to his face, Ash's Pokémon began rapidly trying to do just that, but before he could barely even get one eye clear, the energy-seeking tendrils of the massively enhanced Mega Drain were already upon him. With a cry of surprise, he was soon being lifted high up into the air while his entire body began getting covered in the bubbling green energy-stealing power of Gloom's attack. Ash and his friends were able to tell right away just how effective and enhanced in power the grass-type move was, due to Bulbasaur's eyes rolling up and his body going rigid as soon as his health started to get absorbed. With angrily sparking arcs of electricity crackling around the besieged Pokémon high in the air, Bulbasaur could do nothing but cry out in pain while his stamina was ripped away from him. What was worse, every bit of energy stolen from him was being siphoned back into Gloom, making her even stronger with every bit of strength she gained from that which had been stolen from her opponent. However, After having used the same kinds of techniques and been the victim of them as well in other battles, Ash wasn't about to let Bulbasaur get beaten by a grass-type Pokémon's such routine variety of tricks. It was in that moment that the bright young man's sharp intellect really shone through as he suddenly thought to himself with wide eyes while looking up at Bulbasaur. Wait a second, that's the trick with these kinds of attacks, isn't it? Of course. That's how these energy-stealing moves work. I remember Professor Oak telling me one time that Pokémon using moves like Mega Drain and its counterparts focus on turning the healthy white blood cells in their bodies, which governs health and deals with immunity and fighting sicknesses, into an actual weapon. The trick of those types of moves focuses on actually pulling out a small amount of those cells from their bodies and externalizing them in a protective membranous shield of pure chlorophyll energy. Which is why the techniques themselves look green or even blue depending on the move. Ash's eyes narrowed deeply in thought. When the techniques themselves, like absorb, actually latch onto the target, the white blood cells from the Pokémon using it acts like a disease in the body of the one who didn't. Those cells then absorb the energy from the victim and transport it back to their host with the link that's maintained throughout the execution of the move. They then become normal blood cells again and release the stolen energy out through the body. With that kind of thinking, it probably wouldn't be a stretch to use a similar, more powerful move as a counter shield to one like Mega Drain in order to reverse its effects. At least. Arceus, I hope so. Knowing he had nothing to lose and going off of gut instinct, Ash yelled out, Bulbasaur, I know you're hurting, but try using Giga Drain. Right now. Wait, what? Erika shouted in shock at her younger opponent's unexpected command. However, both she and Gloom underestimated Bulbasaur's will and intensity because, upon hearing his trainer's words, the grass-type's eyes snapped open with fire lit deep within his irises. Crying out his name as loudly as possible from within the cocoon of health-draining energy he was suspended within, Bulbasaur's own body started to glow in a way that first seemed small and insignificant, but as the seconds ticked by, the glow appeared to all but explode into an all-out beacon of raw power. Mustering every ounce of will he had, Ash's hardy and resilient Pokémon summoned forth the strength needed to use Giga Drain and, even though it was a vast struggle with Mega Drain wreaking havoc through his system, Bulbasaur's will to fight for his trainer would not be denied. Amazingly, in yet another miraculous feat in a gym match that already been classified as nothing but incredible all throughout, a second and even brighter dome of energy started to suffuse and shroud Bulbasaur inside of the green one that Gloom had trapped him within. Suddenly, to everyone's shock who was so closely observing the battle, an explosion of blue tentacles erupted from inside of the inner dome that was now separating Bulbasaur from the effects of Mega Drain. Not only that, but since he was no longer subject to the effects of Gloom's attack, Ash's Pokémon dropped back to the ground and landed, albeit a tad unsteadily, on his feet. As soon as he touched the concrete earth, Bulbasaur looked up with sharp focus on his panting face and then grunted his name as the blue tentacles of Giga Drain surged forward and impacted against the green ones of Gloom's Mega Drain. In a show of unique battle prowess not often seen in such a manner, the opposing sides of energy dueled back and forth for several endless seconds without either one giving so much as an inch. While Bulbasaur indeed had to struggle in his weakened state to keep up the fight, Gloom as well could be seen struggling to use much of the strength she had stolen from Bulbasaur to feed her own attack and allow it to stand on even ground with the naturally superior force of Giga Drain. Oh wow! Rose exclaimed in awe from beside her equally as amazed-looking coworkers behind Erika. I've never seen two grass-type Pokémon fight head-to-head with energy-draining moves before. They look like they're on totally even ground. Orchida nodded in agreement as she held her hands in front of her chest in a show of anxiety. For Ash though, he wasn't keen on letting the current battle end in a stalemate as he suddenly yelled, Bulbasaur, use synthesis. Splitting his focus between keeping up his end of the duel and using the attack he had just been commanded, Bulbasaur's body started to shimmer with faint specks of light as the sun shining high above in the sky seemed to be drawn down onto the bulb on his back. Realizing the danger her Pokémon was facing since Bulbasaur's Giga Drain rapidly began gaining ground on her, Gloom's Mega Drain with the more energy Ash's Pokémon recovered using synthesis, Erica decided to go for a desperate strategy as she shouted, "Gloom, use Sweet Scent." Utilizing one of the trickiest, though most effective moves in a grass Pokémon's arsenal, Gloom smiled and then began releasing a thick pink spore-like cloud from the middle of the leafy bud on her head. As the intoxicatingly sweet aromatic mist drifted across the walkway and over the dueling tendrils of Mega Drain and Giga Drain, Bulbasaur tried to recoil back, but there was no time to avoid the widespread attack. Within seconds, the mist of pink sweetness washed over the male Pokémon and caused Bulbasaur's face to instantly take on a lofty, almost drugged expression. Since his concentration had now lapsed due to inhaling Gloom's powerful sweet scent, her Mega Drain started to gain ground on Giga Drain. But, true to the form of their back and forth battle, Ash was quick on delivering a rebuttal. "Fine. Two can play at that game, Erica. Bulbasaur, use your sweet scent." Even though his reactions were dulled somewhat by the overwhelming femininely sweet pheromones now invading his olfactory senses, Bulbasaur managed to hear his trainer and fought just hard enough against the subtle enemy seeking to take him down from the inside to emit his own version of the passive-aggressive attack. However, unlike Gloom's pink cloud that she had released earlier, the aroma-laden haze that he released from the bulb on his back was actually a light red in color. Much like when Gloom used her own sweet scent, Bulbasaur's quickly covered the distance between them and washed over the surprised female grass type like a wave of strong-smelling ocean water. Just as with Bulbasaur, the effect on Gloom was instantaneous as her face slackened and her body became loose, even a small blush adorned her cheeks. Unlike the feminine, soft, pleasant aroma Bulbasaur had inhaled from her sweet scent, Gloom's experience with his own was far different. For Erica's first Pokémon and precious friend, Gloom's senses were overloaded with the strong, stout, manly, if that was a term even usable to describe a Pokémon, pheromones that comprised Bulbasaur's own unique sweet scent. And then, just like that, the dynamic of the battle had drastically shifted. With both of their senses and concentration dulled by the other's cunning use of sweet scent, Bulbasaur and Gloom were unable to keep up the battle of dominance between their individual energy-draining moves. Due to this, the tendrils of Mega Drain and Giga Drain slowly shrunk, dissolved and gradually faded away until no trace of either remained anymore. Blinking in confusion, Misty raised a finger and slowly spoke. What just happened? Ever the analyzer, Brock put a hand to his chin and hummed thoughtfully. Well, I think Ash and Erica, and even Bulbasaur and Gloom, underestimated the effect that the other's sweet scent would have on each other. The effectiveness of such a move usually depends on how receptive the target or targets are to the caster's unique pheromones, so, I guess you could say. He paused and Soledad smiled almost humorously before crossing her arms. That is funny. Apparently Bulbasaur and Gloom are very susceptible to one another's pheromones. It all but put them out of commission when they smelled the other's variation of sweet scent. So, wait a minute, Giselle began while looking at the two grass types who still appeared to be drugged as they simply swayed back and forth on their feet with euphoric expressions on their faces. You mean to say they're attracted to one another? Brock shrugged. Could be. Different types of Pokémon find mates and attract members of the opposite sex through different means. For grass-type Pokémon it has to do with the kinds of scents they are able to release and rather or not they're desirable to their intended prospect for a mate. For grass Pokémon, many different things can affect the smell of their unique, aromatic pheromones. It could be diet, mood, sex, age, weight, health and even strength level. If a Pokémon is strong, healthy and well-trained, their pheromones will be a lot stronger to members of the opposite sex in their species. And both Bulbasaur and Gloom are very well trained. Soledad explained. Naturally, their pheromones would be powerful, but it's just luck of the draw their scents are so compatible with the other. For people like Brock and Soledad the unexpected turn of events may have been interesting, but for two battling trainers like Ash and Erica, it was downright maddening. Come on Bulbasaur, snap out of it. Ash yelled to his still blissful looking Pokémon as he just sat on the ground and swayed back and forth. his hazy eyes now staring straight at Gloom across the field. Pika Pi Pikachu. Pikachu called out urgently to his friend and teammate from down at Ash's legs. Pikachu Pi Pi. However, when the only reply Bulbasaur gave was a lofty sounding, Bulba, Pikachu face vaulted to the ground with multiple sweat beads falling down his head and face. Pika. Erica wasn't having any further luck talking her own Pokémon down from her seemingly drugged state either. Gloom, please get a hold of yourself. She pleaded. This is important. Unfortunately, much like Bulbasaur, the only thing she got in reply was Gloom giving an almost dreamy sounding, Gloom, while she swayed to and fro and stared at Bulbasaur with a bright blush still adorning her cheeks. Ash could see the same exasperated frustration on Erica's face that he was sure existed on his own, but, in that period of calm, he looked down at his Pokémon with an intense, contemplative expression on his face. I can't let it end like this after coming so far in this battle, it would be humiliating for Bulbasaur. But how do I get him to fight when he doesn't even have control over his own senses? Eventually, Ash's eyes widened as a thought suddenly hit him. In his mind he knew it would be a little rough, but at the current point, he had officially run out of ideas of how to get them out of where they'd found themselves. Hating what he was about to do but knowing it had to be done, the boy gave a firm command. Bulbasaur, shoot your razor leaf straight up into the air. Much like when he had used Sweet Scent earlier, Bulbasaur heard his trainer and managed to do as told. Although, when he released said sharp leaves out of the bulb on his back and up into the air, it was done lazily. Fortunately though, the simple execution was all that was needed because as the leaves came falling back to the ground a short time later, Ash's unexpected strategy born from desperation was finally revealed in full. His own serrated leaves raining down upon him and cutting into his skin was just the bucket of icy water Bulbasaur needed to snap himself out of his stupor and then shake his head rapidly to clear it of the fog that had settled there. Seeing his Pokémon's return to lucidness as Bulbasaur looked around with his eyes now clear and alert, Ash gave a cheer of triumph and pumped his fist. Yes, Bulbasaur. Great work. Now let's end this battle. Use Vine Whip on Gloom's feet. Wait, how? Erica shouted in shock while looking from her still aloof-looking Gloom to Ash's now fully refocused Bulbasaur. Although, just as her younger opponent's Pokémon moved to follow through on his trainer's command and sent two lightning-fast vines rocketing at her own, Erica's eyes widened in understanding. Of course, he used Bulbasaur's own razor leaf to free it of the effects of Gloom's sweet scent. It's like if someone is too scared to move and causes themselves pain to regain control of their bodies, he had Bulbasaur hurt himself to get his senses back. However, her astute observation wasn't enough to save her Pokémon since, at the same time, Bulbasaur's vines latched onto Gloom's legs and swiftly yanked her off her feet. As Erica watched, Gloom's body hit the ground hard with her head impacting the walkway with enough force to also knock sense back into her as well. Unfortunately for both Gloom and her trainer though, Ash and Bulbasaur had taken control of the battle and that was a place in which they would soon greatly regret being on the opposite side of. As soon as he had completed his use of Vine Whip, Ash was already yelling for Bulbasaur to use Razor Leaf and he promptly did so. This time the storm of jagged leaves erupting with full ferocity and soaring at the still stunned Gloom far too fast for her to evade. Desperately attempting, and failing, to get to her feet, Gloom was soon swarmed with the gale of razor-sharp leaves and gave a loud cry of pain as she was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the natural green-colored daggers. Seconds later Gloom went half skidding, half tumbling out of the storm of leaves with scratches and cuts marring her body. She didn't have any time to rest though because, like an army blazing through the heart line of their enemy, Bulbasaur came charging out of the dying gust of leaves with his vines flying towards her. Before she could move, Gloom was suddenly struck across the face with one of the vines and then immediately spun around in a full 360 due to the force of the second hit to the other side of her face. Stumbling on trembling legs back a few feet, Gloom was forced to endure a brutal side strike to her midsection, courtesy of one of Bulbasaur's vines which actually made her curl inwards and almost fall forward. In a mere second after that hit she felt yet another one, this time right under her chin as she actually went slightly airborne and flew back a foot or two. Before she could even attempt to right herself or Erica could so much as try to get her Pokémon out of the painful mess she was now in, Ash could be heard shouting. Bulbasaur. Use take down. Bulba. 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 The quadruped grass type chanted as he ran full steam at Gloom and then, with a jumping tackle of epic ferocity, slammed all of his bodyweight directly into her with a final loud shout of his name. Bulbasaur. Launched off of her feet like a pebble getting flung from a slingshot, Gloom was sent soaring across the concrete walkway much like a streak of lightning from Bulbasaur's powerful hit. Not only was the immediate pain from the brutal takedown bad enough, but Gloom's flight through the air was soon halted when she slammed into the trunk of one of the trees lining the walkway and then fell to the ground below like she was made of lead. For several seconds everyone watched with bated breath as Gloom simply lay on the ground before, slowly, she tried to struggle back up to her feet. Erica watched her oldest friend and Pokémon with wavering eyes as she fought to stand again, but, just as Gloom nearly made it back up, all strength finally failed her legs and she collapsed to the grass once more. Seeing that her boss and friend's last Pokémon was now beyond a shadow of a doubt unable to battle after making one final valiant attempt, Delilah raised her hand and pointed towards Ash. Gloom is unable to battle. Since the gym leader is now out of Pokémon, I hereby declare the winner of this battle to be Ash and Bulbasaur. Ash's friends and Pikachu all erupted into immediate applause for their friend's hard-earned victory, but, before Ash himself could run over and pick up Bulbasaur and thank him for such a well-fought battle, his Pokémon suddenly ran across the walkway and over to the still-downed Gloom. While their trainers looked on in surprise, Bulbasaur stopped next to his fellow grass type and then gently nudged her head with an oddly tender gesture. Looking up at the one who was trying to help her stand, Gloom's face showed obvious surprise that it was Bulbasaur, her opponent, that was trying to assist her. Although, that surprise quickly turned into embarrassment as she blushed and gave a rather timid sounding gloom, as Bulbasaur helped her back to her feet. Smiling at his former opponent and using his vines to help support her, Bulbasaur merely shook his head and then started to speak to her. Bulba. Bulba Bulba, Bulbasaur soar. Whatever he said to her quite clearly didn't make her embarrassment any better, since Gloom put her hands to her face and looked away while her blush grew even brighter. Gloom. Gloom gloom, gloom. Bulba. He replied with another smile and nod of his head while their respective trainers walked up to them, flanked by their respective group of friends. So Ash began a little unsurely. What's going on here, Bulbasaur? You okay? Looking up at his trainer, Bulbasaur merely nodded again. Bulbasaur. He then looked at Gloom and smiled. Bulbasaur soar. Erica looked at her Pokémon and then knelt down to her level as she asked with concern in her voice and also on her face. Are you okay, Gloom? You really took a hard hit there. Gloom, with a blush still on her face, nodded at her trainer and then gave a side glance at Bulbasaur before speaking in a shy voice. Gloom, gloom gloom, gloom. Erica's own face seemed to take on an expression of genuine surprise for a moment before she then looked from her Pokémon, to Bulbasaur, and then back again. Eventually, her confused visage morphed into one of understanding as she smiled in slight amusement and closed her eyes. Oh, now I see, Gloom. Well, that's nothing to be ashamed of at all. He is a fine Pokémon after all. Gloom's face turned even redder, almost as though mortified at her trainer's words, and then lunged back with sweat beads dripping down her face. Gloom. Gloom gloom. She denied vehemently while shaking her head as Bulbasaur looked at her oddly. Glancing between the two of them and not understanding what was happening at all, Ash heard Erica giggle and then looked over at her. Erica. Mind filling me in, please? The gym leader simply looked at her victorious challenger and then smiled sweetly. Oh Ash, it's nothing bad. My Gloom just seems to have developed a little crush on your Bulbasaur, that's all. Once more Gloom seemed like she was ready to crawl into the earth and never emerge while Bulbasaur continued to stare at her strangely, not understanding what was wrong with her. However, after hearing her explanation, Ash immediately understood and then felt a little silly at his own failure to pick up on the signs. Smiling and placing his hands on his hips, the black-haired trainer looked down at his Pokémon and chuckled. Wadaya no Bulbasaur. I think you got yourself a girlfriend. Looking up at his trainer and tilting his head in confusion, Bulbasaur gave a small, bulba, to show he wasn't really following. Although, luckily for him, Pikachu seemed to understand the gist of the situation just fine as he walked over to his comrade with a sagely look of wisdom on his face and then whispered into Bulbasaur's ear. Quite obviously he didn't have any troubles understanding what was going on after Pikachu was done telling him because at that moment, Bulbasaur's own face turned red as he jumped away from the brightly blushing Gloom and shouted with a rapid shake of his head. Bulbasaur. Apparently eager to mess with his teammate and have a little fun at his expense, Pikachu morphed a sly expression and then leaned in before whispering conspiratorially again to the grass type. No one knew what he was saying naturally, but it was obvious by how red Bulbasaur's whole body turned, not to mention the way he snapped back at Pikachu with an angrily embarrassed Bulbasaur, that the little yellow Pokémon had been teasing him about Gloom. Further credence was given to that assumption when Pikachu turned away with his paws to his cheeks, his eyes two thin lines of pure mischief and his very facial expression set into one of glee, as he gave his rarely heard perverted giggle of, Pika 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 Pika. Everyone gathered all gave a laugh at Bulbasaur and Gloom's embarrassment in the funny situation, but, soon, Erica turned to Ash and then smiled. Well Ash, I believe we still have some business to tend to, don't we? Before he could respond she reached into one of the waist pockets of her summer dress and then pulled out a small, silver case which she held out to him with both hands. Ash, this was one of the best and most exciting battles I've had in a very long time. Not only did you defeat me in battle with some very unusual and intelligent strategies, most of which you came up with on the fly, but you also showed just how close your bond is with your Pokémon in battle. No matter how hard it gets, your faith in one another never wavers, and that is what makes you such a strong team. She then clicked a small button on the front of the case which caused it to open and reveal a small, flower-shaped badge resting inside upon black lining. The badge itself had a small, silver, secondary flower-shaped design in the very center, while the outer edges of it, which also resembled flower petals, were all painted into different colors. In some way it looked similar to a rainbow etched on a flower. As she revealed the confines of the case to Ash, Erica announced with a bright smile. Ash, I would like to present you with the rainbow badge as proof of your victory at the Celadon Pokémon Gym. You earned it in more ways than one. Ash smiled at the sight of the shining new badge resting inside of the case, but, almost as soon as the smile appeared, it vanished and his excited facial expression was instead replaced with a conflicted one. Seeing this, Erica asked in concern. Ash, what's wrong? The boy with the Z-like marks on his cheeks just looked up at Erica before shaking his head slowly. It's just as much as I looked forward to having this battle to see if we could beat you, Erica, I don't know how I feel about taking this badge. The perfume expert and grass-type enthusiast of a gym leader looked at the younger trainer in confusion. But why? You and your Pokémon earned this, Ash. His friends and Erica's also seemed to be at loss as to why he felt the way he did, so the young man explained with a sigh. It's just, when two trainers battle against each other, whoever loses has to hand over a specified amount of credits to the winner, physically or through digital transaction. When a gym leader loses to a challenger, they're passing over of a gym badge as certification of that defeat, so they have to mark that loss against their gym in order to pay the winning trainer. Which is why I know most gym leaders have online accounts, so they don't have to keep so much money on hand with all of the challengers they constantly have. He then rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. At least, that's how I've gotten paid for all the victories I've had over the gym leaders that me and my Pokémon have faced so far. The blue-haired gym leader allowed an amused smile to cross her lips. I have been doing this for quite some time, Ash. You know you don't have to explain the intricacies of proper post-battle conduct between gym leader and trainer to me, right? He nodded but then explained with some guilt in his voice. Yeah, but it's just, well, I know how much gym leaders usually have to pay out to winning challengers, especially the higher they're ranked, and yours is one of the main 8 of Kanto. You've had so much happen to you recently with the burning of your gym and the vandalism of your shop that I don't feel right taking your money. Erica blinked a few times, at a loss for words at Ash's explanation as to why he didn't want to take his gym badge, but, eventually, she merely laughed. Joyfully. In a way in which had everyone but Erica's employees looking at her oddly, mostly since they themselves knew the reason for the humor. After several long moments of laughter, Erica finally stopped and then wiped at her eyes while shaking her hand in Ash's direction. Oh, please forgive me. I'm so sorry, Ash. I didn't mean to laugh, it's just I can honestly say that I have never heard anyone say something like that to me before. Of all the reasons not to want to take a badge. Seeing his dumbfounded, sincerely honest expression, Erica smiled softly at the young, kind-hearted trainer and then shook her head. Ash, you sweet young man. While I greatly appreciate your concern, I must inform you that in this particular instance, money isn't a concern of mine. She then held her hands out and gestured back at her still damaged gym. My gym is insured through the Pokémon League. I may have privately purchased the building so I could grow the plants for my business out of it, but I only own the rights to the property itself, not the actual gym name. Unlike some gym leaders, I didn't buy my building with the sole intention of holding battles out of it, so when I did become a gym leader, I allowed the Pokémon League to own the controlling interest of the actual gym itself. As long as I continue to hold onto my status as a gym leader, this building and the property it's on will always be soundly insured. Which means I don't have to pay anything for the repairs it needs right now. Looking back at Ash, Erica held up a single finger and then winked. Besides, even if that wasn't the case, I'm also a businesswoman, Ash. I'm pretty smart with finances, and over the years I've managed to attain quite the safety net in the event that something happens to me or my Pokémon. She then gave an offhanded gesture. As for my shop, don't worry about the repairs there. It in my private condo or privately insured, so the window at the boutique will also be replaced with no cost to myself whatsoever. Erica held the badge up to Ash then and smiled again. So please, while I appreciate your concern, Ash, take this badge. I can more than afford my loss to you. His mind being swiftly put at ease thanks to Erica's assurances, Ash smiled gratefully to her and then reached out to take the badge. Afterwards he held it up to the sun, which made the shiny badge glint brightly, before he then looked to both Pikachu and Bulbasaur and gave a happy laugh. What do you think, guys? We got the rainbow badge. Both Bulbasaur and Pikachu cheered excitedly in response to their trainer's enthusiastic statement while he continued to hold it up in the air and stare at the newly earned badge with a smile on his face. Hey, another one down. We're that much closer to achieving our goal and a tiny step farther along to being ready to take on the Indigo League. Ash's eyes appeared to shine with determination as he stared up at the rainbow badge. And as Arceus is my witness, for the sake of my Pokémon I swear we'll be ready to enter that conference next year. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX be seen sitting around an outdoor patio table on the garden rooftop back at her condo building. They were also surrounded by all of their individual Pokémon whom were either resting, playing, exploring, sunning themselves or eating some of the delicious food that Ash, Brock and Erica had prepared for them shortly after arriving. After having taken a trip to the Pokémon Center so Ash and Erica could get their battle-weary Pokémon healed up by Nurse Joy, the large group of friends and trainers had made their way to Erica's condo. All under the promise of an evening of relaxation with delicious food that several of the hands present in said troop most definitely knew how to prepare. During an eventful period of both human and Pokémon food preparation atop Erica's beautiful rooftop garden, the likes of which involved salad tossing using some of her own homegrown veggies and fruits, as well as grilling courtesy of Brock, the atmosphere of the day after the intense battle earlier had been nothing but enjoyable and relaxing. Misty and Giselle helped Erica's friends prepare the salad and fruit bowls. Ash, Soledad and Erica focused on making the Pokémon's meals and Brock himself, as stated prior, found his skills were much more warranted to that of the grilling. Mostly for all those in attendance who weren't strict vegans and vegetarians, like Erica and her employees. Sitting around the rectangular, finely clothed table as he and everyone else enjoyed the delicious food they had all made together. Ash simply watched the grass-type Pokémon that Erica had brought from her gym after the fire as they worked away diligently and happily at caring for her many, many different plants, flowers and shrubs. His attention was pulled from that though when the laid-back conversation at the table took a sudden shift as Giselle spoke up in a tone that was famously reserved only for when she was curious about something. Hey, I was wondering about something that I was hoping some of the actual gym leaders and official trainers here at this table could tell me about. At her words, everyone turned to look at the brunette and Giselle merely took a sip of her orange carrot juice before continuing. I may have learned a lot at Pokémon Tech, but one thing we never actually get a chance to cover until the final years is monetary exchangement and financial trade between trainers and gym leaders in real life. I mean, how does that happen? Pokémon trainers, coordinators and gym leaders have to make a living too, so, exactly how do they do it? The table remained silent for a few moments before Brock eventually took the initiative to speak up first. Well, I guess that's pretty simple to explain really. As a Pokémon trainer you're either split into two categories, official or non. An official trainer would be one like Ash who has both a trainer ID, as well as a constantly updated registered license in his Pokédex that shows he is partaking in an official competition of some kind. In his circumstance, that would be the Indigo League. The squinty-eyed teen held his hands out on the table and continued. Technically, anyone can become a trainer and capture, raise and battle Pokémon, but if you aren't recognized by the governing league in your home region in some way, you'll be limited to what you can do. For instance, you won't be able to participate in any official league competitions, including gym battles, and no registered trainer will be required to give you money if you beat them. There are obviously pros and cons to both sides, like if you want to be a real piece of crap and abuse your Pokémon, you aren't forced to live up to the same ethical standards as a trainer who is officially registered and recognized by the league would be. You can still have your Pokémon taken from you by the police or league officials if you're somehow found guilty, but it's not very easy for that to happen if you live under the radar, so to speak. He then waved his hands. But back on subject. For a trainer to get registered for the Pokémon League or any major competition, they first have to have a trainer ID established for them at either their local Pokémon Center by an authorized Nurse Joy, or by the regional professors. You don't have to have a Pokédex to do so, since that's really just more of a special little perk you get for going through a Pokémon professor if they decide to give you one, but you do have to have a trainer ID. Brock pointed at Giselle. And that's where your question comes into play. Trainerids are needed, aside from several other reasons, so that if two official trainers meet on the road and battle but don't have the money on hand to pay the winner, they can instead pay digitally through any mobile device they own. The winnings then just get transferred to the winning trainer's credit account. The former gym leader then shrugged. Of course, to be realistic, it's not going to be every single day that two official trainers are going to meet and battle on the road, and for registered trainers, unlike unregistered ones, they need a way to earn money for themselves and their Pokémon. After all, a lot of times unofficial trainers are just people who do it part-time but have other commitments and lives to live aside from going around focusing on training, capturing and battling Pokémon all the time. Misty intervened suddenly. That's why a lot of times, depending on how old you have to be in your home region to officially get a Pokémon from that region's professor, you have to start preparing yourself to become a trainer in school long before you actually become one. Otherwise, you would have a lot of people who would totally skip what they needed to learn in primary school before their journey and would then get out into life knowing next to nothing about anything. Ash nodded at her words. Yeah, I know that for a fact. Here in Kanto the limited age is 10, so when I decided I wanted to train Pokémon when I was 5, I had a ton of serious crunch time I had to go through with Professor Oak, who became my primary teacher and my Pokémon instructor, all in one. I didn't have to bust my brain doing all that work so fast, since I could have just taken my time and finished my primary schoolwork at 13, like most kids who wants to be trainers here in Kanto do, but I really wanted to start as early as possible. The messy-haired young trainer shook his head and crossed his arms. But man, that was a lot of summers spent hitting the books instead of doing what most kids did during their time off from school. And I actually like to learn too. He opened his eyes and shrugged then. Out of the four of us who got Pokémon the day I left home, me and Gary were the only ones who were 10, the minimum age. The other two were 13. Gary fast-tracked it like I did but in actual school instead of with Professor Oak, like me. Soledad nodded as she crossed her own arms. It's all the same with Pokémon coordinating except there isn't any unofficial coordinators. You have to be registered in order to compete in contests, and if you want to do that, you have to complete your primary schoolwork before you ever get your first Pokémon and become licensed. Just the same as with an official Pokémon trainer. It all just depends on which age limit there is in whatever region you live in. Brock took over again. But back to your earlier question, Giselle. The way monetary trade works between trainers and gym leaders is basically so that official Pokémon trainers have a way to make money to live off of on their travels. Which is why it's pretty much classified as a full-on career. Erica surprisingly interjected at that moment. Gym leaders actually have it a little easier in some respects, although the rigors of passing the qualification exam to become one is much harder than simply getting licensed as a trainer and receiving your first Pokémon. She took a sip of her own drink before setting it down again. Gym leaders are basically what? Representatives of the Pokémon League itself from whatever region they may operate from. Your job as a gym leader, first and foremost, is to ensure, through all-out battling, that the trainers hoping to take on the Pokémon League Conference Championship of that particular region are fit and competent enough, both mentally and physically, for the task itself. You're also meant to judge whether or not the individual is responsible as a trainer, here meaning if they outright abuse their Pokémon in any obvious way. Which is why we have the power to report trainers who are. The young woman held out a single hand. As licensed representatives of the league, whether we own our own gym or not, we get paid for our services. That pay being greater or lesser depending on how successful and well known the gym and the gym leader themselves are. You may make a few $100,000 a year depending, or just a few. It all depends on you. Gym leaders who all but fall off the map but still keep their gym open may only get paid 1,000 or 2,000 credits a year. She then gestured towards Brock. But it's like Brock said earlier, for the kind of life Pokémon trainers live, they can't simply rely on battling and beating other official trainers all the time for money or they would be poor more often than not. Especially since a lot of the trainers you meet on the road could be just as hard up as you. And that's why gyms exist outside of just proving your battling skills to get closer to the Pokémon League conferences. Erica looked over at Ash. Like I told you earlier, Ash, there was no reason for you to worry about me paying you for winning. In all actuality, it's part of my job description. Just like any other business, gym leaders have overhead we have to account for too with the income we make, and one of the things we have to plan for putting back into the business is you, the trainer. The pretty gym leader smiled. After all, we're a big part of where you get your money from as a trainer, right? If we can't pay our bills because we splurge our money needlessly, then we're no different than other businesses that make bad decisions and fold up. And sometimes, depending on the trainer and their performance when they battle us, especially concerning how they treat their Pokémon, we can choose to give them extra bonuses or not in the final payout. So then, Giselle spoke up slowly. Let me get this straight. Official Pokémon trainers licensed by the Pokémon League, through a regional professor or nurse Joy, are the only ones who can get paid for their performances in battle. Through either another official trainer or a gym leader. And that's why you have to have a trainer ID, for digital payment. Everyone at the table who knew the game, so to speak, nodded with Brock answering her. That's pretty much it, unless two unofficial trainers are just into battling for money. Which is why if you ever want to become an official trainer yourself and take on a league conference or any other league challenge, you'll have to go back and graduate Pokémon.